Let's get into our Tuesday panel now. We're joined by Sky News contributor Kosha Garda and Stephen Senatiempo, breakfast host at 2CC in Canberra. Thanks both for joining us. Interesting, Kosha, a lot of controversy about the NDIS lately. We've covered it on this program a number of times, some of the crazy things being funded by the NDIS. But today, Bill Shorten says, yeah, there's a big problem and effectively there's going to be a major review. He calls it a reboot.
I think when things get too big to ignore, that's, what you'd expect to see. There's a few things about this that fascinate me, Chris. So one is just around accountability and leadership, because I believe Bill Shorten was the architect of the original structure of this. And so if things aren't going that well and he's the one to sound the alarm to it, I find that a little bit interesting. I think the second one is just the reality of government and where in the Western sphere we are right now, this gluttonous phase of uncontrolled debts and deficits. When you're getting to $1 trillion in debt, as you are in Australia, some tough decisions are going to have to be made. One of them on the table could even be dismantling the whole thing. Didn't exist before 2013. Maybe it doesn't need to right now. And then the last point really quickly, I think there's something deeper here about just the role of government and society in general and the incentives these types of entitlement programs create for scope creep, for fraud, which he's alluded to, of people trying to latch onto the system, and just is it really the role of government to be helping disability anyway, as opposed to other structures that did that throughout human history, churches, families, things like that. So I think all these things are sort of coming to a head in this issue.
Look, there's no doubt when you start a big government program that hands out funding, it will be rorted. Nothing was surer, and some of us were saying that before this thing started. But Bill Shorten is at pains to say this is not about saving money, it's about delivering a better service. Here's a bit of what he said in Canberra today.
It is not delivering the outcomes Australians with disabilities need and the Australian public expects. For the NDIS to reach its potential, it needs a reboot.
Bill Shorten today. Stephen, we've heard about prostitutes being funded, about NDIS paying for psychics, and how about 1 in 10 little boys are ending up on the NDIS with autism. But we should never forget that the coalition in opposition supported the NDIS, so they kind of own it as well back when Labor were in power. Plus the coalition was in government for 9 years and all this sort of got out of control while they were in charge as well.
Yeah, no doubt about that. But it's interesting. Look, I think Bill Shorten hit the nail on the head with most of his observations today. But as Kosha said, he was the architect of this thing and it's working exactly the way he designed it. That is the problem, that, it's a big government program that was all about throwing money at a problem. As most things that we see with Labor governments is if you throw enough money at it, it's like education. Keep throwing money at it and we'll see what happens. But the absolute rorting in this system, because of the way it's administrated, was always going to be a problem. For the entirety of my radio career, one of the main things that people ring up and complain about is the rorting of the NDIS system. You hear stories of a bloke who mows lawns, for instance, charging $20 to one customer and $200 to somebody who's being funded by the NDIS. I mean, these things are very, very easy to manage if, in fact, you put the processes in place to do them. Now, I'm not convinced that the NDIS in any form is the right way to go, but I think most of us would agree that we want to help people with disabilities. But outside of specific apparatus that are designed to help somebody with a specific disability, all of these things are always going to be rorted unless you have very, very serious checks and balances in place. And the fact that there are so many middlemen out there benefiting from this thing, including psychiatrists who are being apparently paid exorbitant fees to register somebody as autistic so they can get onto the NDIS. Well, look, it does need a reboot, but, maybe he should have thought of that when he designed it in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.